The US civil liberties and migrant rights groups are calling for nationwide rallies today to protest that fatal, horrific shooting of an activist in Minnesota by an ICE agent. Newly published video reportedly filmed by the ICE agent Jonathan Ross seemingly shows yet another angle of the confrontation that led to that deadly encounter with Renee Nicole Good. State authorities have opened up their own investigation of the killing. And Will Pavia has been reporting for The Times in Minneapolis, and he joins us now. Will, good afternoon. I know you are leaving Minneapolis, but what has it been like in Minneapolis these last few days when you were there?
Well, it's been extraordinary. I mean, there have been, of course, protests all over town. It is a place which, of course, rose up and saw a lot of protests after the killing of George Floyd. And this actually happened not very far away from where that happened. And there was a sort of similar response in that the people blockaded the street where it happened, set up braziers, barricades, and there was this sort of great neighborhood push of people bringing food and sort of. I was at some point I was walking down the street and I saw these two young women walking along shouting masks, food, water. Just like, and so there's a lot of people coming together. And then the other thing that has been sort of there is that there've been these protests sort of every morning and sometimes in the afternoons as well outside the base that the ICE officials are using, sort of like their headquarters. And there's been a little bit of trouble there and occasional sort of skirmishes, I suppose. But the response has mostly been pretty peaceful. A lot of people were worried that it would look like the sort of aftermath of the George Floyd killing, but it hasn't really looked like that at all so far.
We are now aware of a new video that is emerged, and this one is coming from the ICE agent who shot Renee Good. What does the new footage actually reveal to us?
I think the most interesting thing is it shows right before the shooting and his exchanges with Renee Nicole Good and with Renee Nicole Good's partner Rebecca. It was published by a sort of right-wing Minnesota news site, and the Vice President J.D. Vance sort of reposted it on Twitter, as did Caroline Levitt, the White House press officer. They clearly seem to think it's exonerating. I'm not quite sure that it is. You see the officer getting out of his car. So Renee Nicole Good is parked sideways in the road. She's trying to sort of block, it looks like, the ICE cars, and she waves someone else through, and the ICE officers get out of the car, and one of them walks up to her. The Mr. Ross, we presume, he walks around the car, and you can see that there's a dog in the back seat of the car, sort of staring rather dolefully at you. And then he comes around the car, and she kind of smiles at him and says something along the lines of, what's up? I don't have a problem with you, or something like. She's very calm. She says, I'm not mad at you, dude. And then he walks around the back of the car, and he's followed by Renee Nicole Good's partner, Rebecca, who has got out of the car, and she's filming him and he's filming her, and he starts filming her license plate, and she says, that's our plate. We don't change it every day like some people. That's a reference to a lot of protesters in Minnesota believe that the ICE agents are changing their registration plates so that they can't follow them, because one of the efforts by protesters has been to sort of trace and trail these ICE raids and to try and warn people about it. So people wear whistles around their necks, and they sound their horns to try and warn people when these ICE agents are coming to make arrests. So he films her license plate. Then he walks around the other side of the car, and Rebecca is still following him and filming him. And she goes to get into the car, and she turns to him and says, she kind of taunts him a little bit, says, why don't you go and have lunch, big boy? And she says, I'm a US effing Navy, I'm a US veteran, I'm a US citizen, and she says, why don't you go away? And she says, go ahead. And she's sort of with a slightly dismissive wave of her hand. He then walks around the front of the car, and he is filming he's sort of at the front corner of the car, and Rebecca tries to get into the car, but she's locked the doors because the ICE agent was trying to get into her car another ICE agent was trying to get into her car on the other side. And then you see her turning the wheel to pull away. Another agent is shouting her to get out of the car. She turns her wheel to pull away. And as she does that, she pulls towards the ICE agent who's filming, and he shouts, "Whoa." And the rest of the video is the car sort of shooting off down the street to crash because she's been shot.
I mean, you're right in the sense that it seems that this new video has been used, particularly by the vice president, who gave a staunch press conference defending the ICE agent and his actions and condemning Renee Good for her actions. But it seems to not clear anything up at all because, again, the car is moving away from the ICE agent. The ICE agent never makes contact with the car. The wheels are quite clearly turning away from him rather than pointing at him. How do you see this playing out, Will? What is the general... Is this shifting at all within MAGA? I mean, the people who are pro-ICE and against ICE, I'm not quite sure that that's going to change, but has this had any effect on Donald Trump's support? Are there people within that support who have seen this incident and said, look, I'm all for removing illegal immigrants from this country, people who don't have the right to be here, but this is too far. This is a US citizen being shot for trying to get out the way.
I haven't actually encountered any of that yet, but I do think it's quite extraordinary that anyone could watch it and not think that it's wrong to be opening fire on someone who's making a 3-point turn in the road. And the idea that he was about to be run over or rammed by the car just seems completely ridiculous. I've spoken to people who sort of said something along the lines of, you might agree with the strategy of removing illegal immigrants and making arrests, but we don't like their tactics. Within the sort of MAGA sort of movement that you encounter on Twitter, there was a lot initially, I don't know about after this video, but initially there was a lot of the sort of, well, if you're going to mess around with ICE officers, this is what happens kind of response. But I really think that this one is so hard to justify, and I actually don't know how anyone can watch that video and think that was a completely all right response to these two women. Renee Nicole Good's wife, Rebecca, put out a statement yesterday that said something along the lines of, we came with whistles, they came with guns. And it's just completely extraordinary that they're clearly protesters. They're clearly trying to disrupt the activities of ICE, and they're also trying to warn people. They're blowing their whistles, they're sounding their horns. I spoke to a guy who actually witnessed what happened from his house. He came outside because he thought there was a delivery, and he said to me, I still can't understand. I can't make any sense of it. He'd seen violence before, he'd seen shootings before, he said, but he said this woman was murdered for blowing her horn. And really, it's so hard to see how anyone can come away with a different interpretation.
Will, do you think we're going to see a change of behaviour from ICE agents? Obviously, tensions are very high. The protests, more protests are expected today across the country. Is there going to be any directive from the powers that be, Kristi Noem, I guess, the Department of Homeland Security, for a change of behaviour in the way ICE do their business?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think anyone can think that this is a good thing. But the message from the government thus far has been sort of ramping things up and sending more officers. When I've watched sort of encounters between protesters and ICE officials in Minneapolis, there has sometimes been an attempt by officers to say, look, this is why we were doing this. This is, and to be quite reasonable with the protesters. You have to sort of imagine that this is Minneapolis. This is a lot of the protesters, these sort of middle class professionals who, are very well organized, and they've all got a lot of them have yellow vests on, and they're sort of, organizing the protests and sort of almost self-policing. So, you have an element there that's throwing snowballs that wants to kind of get in people's faces. But I think possibly within the ranks of ICE, there seems sometimes to be an attempt to say, look, I watched a man being bundled to the floor on Friday morning, and an officer came up to me and said, "Look, he was kicking cars, not just our cars, but other cars in the crosswalk, and that's why he was arrested. He wasn't behaving rationally." And sort of tried to sort of say, "Look, we're just out here trying to do our job too," that kind of thing. But a lot of it has been this rather sort of macho standoff, and a lot of the Minnesotans saying, "You big tough guys think you're tough," and so there's a lot of that kind of argy-bargy going on, and I haven't yet seen anyone trying to lower the temperature.
Well, thank you for giving us your time. Good to speak. Will Pavia there. It's been reporting for the Times in Minneapolis.